Welcome to the Making of Me podcast. Today's guest is Brad Flower, agency founder, branding expert, and author of a naming book. Brad journey began by starting a business with no clients, no experience, and during a collapse economy, an experience that shaped how he think about branding, clarity, and growth for service-based business. It's really a pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. So, Brad, what's pushed you to start a business during such difficult economy?
Well, I was managing a bicycle store and I really enjoyed that work. However, it sort of felt like aside from starting a bicycle store, there was no place for me to go. And so it was nearing the end of the summer, which is the busy time. And I left the bicycle shop and was working on refurbishing a house that we had purchased, my wife and I. And I thought I would get a job at an advertising agency maybe that fall and to be a copywriter. I have a background in writing. Well, as the fall kind of continued, the economy got worse and worse and no one was hiring. So I talked to a friend and he had been putting on a music festival and I was working on a bicycle festival. So initially we thought we'd start Bullhorn and do event marketing. That was kind of our first big idea. Well, we quickly learned that everyone who ran an event wanted us to help, but no one wanted to pay us to help. And so it's hard to run a business if no one wants to pay you to do what you do. So that's a good first lesson. And so we kind of quickly switched and we started off doing really at that time, we did kind of whatever we had to do to pay ourselves. And so we did all sorts of things. We hosted events for people. We had one kind of sort of strange instance. A friend of ours was running a music event and she called and it was this really it was a large one-time event. And she called panicked and said, I don't know what Bullhorn is, but our beer vendor backed out. Can you all sell beer? And so we were like, well, I guess. And so we got our 1-day liquor license and bought a bunch of beer and sold the beer. But so early on, the point is, people tell you, give you the advice when you start a business, you need to focus, focus, focus. And that's probably good advice, but focusing is a luxury of having money. And if you don't have any money, you have to do whatever you can do to make it work until you can get to the point where you can focus. So that's kind of a little bit of our journey and why we started it. Really, we started it because no one was hiring. So we're sort of reluctant entrepreneurs.
Wow, amazing, amazing. So earlier on, what mistake taught you the biggest lessons about building a service brand?
I think so. What has happened over the last 15 years is we have had the luxury of focusing. And so it's at first we focused in on becoming a branding agency. And that was an important decision because at the time we were doing video work and we were doing marketing work for other companies and website work. And really over the course of a couple of years, we slowly pared that down because we felt like the brand work scaled for us kind of nationally and internationally in a way that some of the other work didn't. And so we were focused in on branding. And at that time, maybe 5-7 years ago, it was sort of enough to say you were a branding agency because there weren't very many of them.
Yeah.
However, over time, everyone who used to call themselves an advertising agency started calling themselves a branding agency. And so it wasn't enough to say we were a branding agency. It didn't create differentiation for us. And so we really thought a lot about who do we do the best work for? And what we realized is that if a company provides a service, that service is provided by the people, which is basically the culture of the company.
Yeah.
And so what we found out that we were good at is really quickly identifying and understanding the culture of an organization and then articulating that culture throughout the brand identity, whether it was language, design, photography, illustration, color, typography, all of the elements of the brand. And so as opposed to a product, which a product is a little different where there's consumer testing and all that sort of stuff. And we weren't really good at the consumer testing, nor were we really interested in it. And so I think partly because of just we're interested in people and interested in working with people. And we developed that skill set of how to kind of understand a culture. And then I also think because of our kind of internal struggles trying to run a service-based business. That gave us also unique insights into what the challenges are, because the people who we work with are like me. They're trying to
Yeah.
figure out how do how do I how do I help my people kind of elevate to the next level? How can we do business development easier? How can we make more effective marketing? All of those sorts of things. So I think partly it has to do with just our client base and who we work with, and then I also think it has a lot to do with our experiences actually just running this business.
Yeah, amazing, amazing. Thank you so much. So, what makes more like a branding service company different from branding a product?
Well, I think the main thing is it's a little more personal. So if you think about a service, like if you were um, a financial services person, or if you were an
Yeah,
architect or an attorney, or when you sell your services, it's really personal because it reflects on you. It's because you're the one whose reputation is on the line each time. So a product is sort of separated from the people who work on it a little bit. And I think it's a little different. So the first thing is, I think it's important to remember that for the people who work there, that service is really personal because it's their work. If you're the architect, you're the one who's spending the time doing all the design work, thinking through the problems of this particular plot of ground and how you're going to solve it with this, whatever building you're going to make. So that's one difference. And I think the other difference is that rather than rather than trying to make your product fit with a group of people, what you're trying to do is really clearly say who we are. Because we think if you can clearly identify who you are, what your perspective is, there are a lot of people out there who would resonate with that. And so rather than trying to fit into some sort of consumer testing model and kind of change your service to appeal to them, just talk about who you are and what you believe in and why you do what you do, and people will resonate with that. Now, service brands have all sorts of other things that are unique and different. Like we do a lot of naming work, for example, and a lot of service brands have the legacy of naming after the founder or the founding partners. And so, that creates certain specific problems. It probably works because that person might be identifiable, they might be famous, they might be good at what they do. But over time, if the company was named after me and I was retiring
yeah,
and you wanted to take over the company, would you want to own a company that had my name? Probably not.
yeah,
you know so it's just and so there's this issue of legacy, and especially right now there's a lot of transition of ownership as these folks have grown these businesses, they're really
yeah,
successful, and now they're wanting to hand them off to junior partners who want a sort of like more contemporary sounding brand. And so in the United States, the history has been that if you run a law firm, the law firm has to be named after founding partners or current partners. And that's just recently changed. And so we're just starting to see a bunch of different sorts of names enter the market. And names that sound a little more like a brand and not so much like a traditional service firm. So
yeah,
anyway, there are all sorts of things that I think are different, and we could dig into like the different aspects, but that's one example, is that the name, you think of all the names of products that you see in like a supermarket, and the names they use lots of little tricks to help you remember them. You think of names like Kit Kat and Reese's Pieces, even like Fanta or Coca-Cola. There are these things that just like sound that are memorable, but those sorts of names don't really work really well for a service company
service
always,
company.
because they can sound a little bit cheap. You think of what's the difference. On one hand, I'm selling something that costs $1, and on the other hand, I'm selling something that costs maybe $100,000.
Yeah,
And so they shouldn't really sound the same.
yeah,
And so there's that difference of scale, which is a little bit different selling a product versus a service, because services can obviously range in price, but services can be quite expensive depending on what you're selling.
yeah. Amazing, amazing. Thank you so much. This is that. This whole of clarity in this. So, how does a strong name change how a business grows?
Well, how a business grows.
Yeah,
Was that yeah, I think there are a couple of things. So first off, I think the best thing a name can do is open the door for the rest of the brand to tell the story. So if there's a strong name, it's going to create some intrigue and make someone want to learn more about it. And so if if you can create a name that creates that sort of intrigue, that will give you an advantage. Now, it's obvious that a name doesn't do everything, because there are all sorts of like successful companies with bad names, like Microsoft, for example. It's sort of a dumb name. It's if you were to name a company, a global giant company, you probably wouldn't call it Microsoft. It's sort of like, if you think of what that means, it's sort of small, cuddly, like micro meaning small, soft. You think of like maybe like a child's toy. It's just like not what you would call a global giant, but they're obviously successful for lots of other reasons, because the brand is strong in all sorts of other ways. And the products that they've created have dominated markets. So I think a strong name can give you the opportunity to tell your story and connect with customers. And that's true of products and services. Now, when you grow, there are other issues that come into play. I think the biggest advantage a name can create as you're growing is that it creates a foundational piece of intellectual property that's valuable for you, and is something that as a founder, you're at some point going to probably sell, or whether it's to your successors or to another company. And so that's something I would be thinking about for all of you service company owners out there is, as you grow, is the name a piece of intellectual property that works for you, or does it work against you? And what we see a lot of the time is that the names are confusing. The names don't make sense. The names were related to a partner that doesn't work there anymore. The names that were related to a service that they don't do anymore, or they were named, they created a name that worked when they were small, but when they grew, the name has competition, maybe nationally or internationally. And so in that case, it creates confusion for the consumer, or it can create a situation where you're in legal problems because you're using a name that someone else has legal ownership to.
Yeah, amazing, amazing. Thank you. Wow, this is really amazing. Is the fact that name can actually help you to tell your stories, and also when it comes to transitions, to speak a whole lot of volumes. So depending on which generation is taking up the business, and yeah, there's a whole lot to see in here. So you work with professional service firm. Why is differentiation so hard for them?
Why is what so hard for them?
Differentiation.
Oh, differentiation. Yeah. Well, first off, so Mike, take for example, my company. We're a branding agency, but we're in the marketing space generally. And so there is no barrier to anyone starting a marketing company. You don't have to be licensed. You don't have to have a degree. You don't have to pass any sort of test or certification. Like literally anyone in the world, anywhere, can start a company and start selling marketing services. You don't have to know anything about it, which is the situation I was in. I didn't know very much about it. And so I'm thankful that that's the case. But also what happens is there are just a lot of companies. So first off, you think of attorneys, and in every small town and every big town, there are attorneys all over the place. So part of the problem is the quantity of businesses. There are so many choices, and they all seem about the same. I think service companies also have a history of, well, in several service companies have a history of not doing very much advertising. And so like for a long time, it was considered unprofessional for attorneys to market their services. So that's just sort of a legacy that the industry has to kind of get over. And so in that case, the only differentiation really was based on referrals. It's like, if I do a good job for you, you refer me to one of your friends, and then your friends refer me to their mom and dad and their cousin. And, it kind of expands like that. But in an age where a lot of that sort of stuff happens online, all of a sudden everyone looks exactly the same, and the names all sound the same, and the colors look the same, and they have the same sorts of logos. And in financial services, you have like pillars and trees and all these sort of like images that you see all the time. So the differentiation problem, I think, has to do with quantity. It has to do with a tradition of not participating in marketing for a lot of these companies. And then I think also there's a mindset. There's a mindset in these firms where a lot of folks are afraid to take risks. And in your brand identity in particular, if you don't want to take risks, what happens?
Yeah.
You end up with something that looks like everybody else. But that's just what happens. It's if you pick the color that is sort of most common, and you pick the sort of logo that's most common and the type of name, you end up with something that's totally undifferentiated. So historically, service companies have been pretty risk averse. And I think that's another tradition that is starting to change actually with the young folks who are taking over these companies now, which is why I'm excited and why I like what we do right now, because there are a lot of people rethinking how things happen in these service firms. They grow up seeing companies like Nike and Apple and these big international companies, and they're like, we want to look cool like that.
Yeah.
And we want our language to sound unique to us. And they feel like they're true experts, but that the expertise doesn't come across in the brand because the brand looks generic.
Yeah.
And so it's a cool opportunity, and it's a good time to be doing what we're doing, I think.
Wow, amazing, amazing. Thanks for the explanation. Yeah, that just cleared a whole lot of doubt on what differentiation stand and how, yeah, company in service business can actually differentiate themselves now compared to in a time where referrals was the only thing that actually speak volumes when it comes to getting jobs and getting a whole lot of approval. So
Mm.
at what point should the business consider a brand transformation?
That is the question. That's a good one. So there are a couple of what we think of as transitional events that make it more likely that it's time for a brand transformation. One is a time of rapid growth. So if you're growing rapidly, all of a sudden you find yourself, we're running this big company, but we still look like we're back here. And that kind of creates problems with the culture, and it creates problems with the clients because there's this perception issue. It's like we're this big company and we still look small and not very sophisticated. So rapid growth is one. With rapid growth also sometimes brings expanding into new markets. So expanding into new markets can cause problems for lots of reasons related to differentiation, especially. And as I mentioned before, often a service firm will start and they'll just pick a name, and they're working locally and the name works and they're doing business, no problem. Then they grow and realize, ooh, someone else already owns the trademark to this name. And so in that case, the problem is success. They've been successful, they've grown, they're expanding, and now they're to the point where actually the name creates a really pretty big business risk. And so they need to think about, that's a time they need to think about a transformation. And then I would say a third, there are probably more, but the third one that we see all the time that comes to mind is a transfer of leadership. And so what often happens is new leaders come in and they're looking around and it's like, why does our website look like it's 1995 still? And why does all of our business assets look so dated? Even though we're providing this great service to our clients, it looks like we're kind of amateurs, or it looks like, my grandpa's service firm or whatever. And so those are kind of the three big ones that I think of right off the top of my head that would be situations where, I guess another one would be if you're expanding into a new service line or changing a service line. We had one company that came to us and their name, it sounded like they provided services to dental offices where you would get your teeth fixed, but they actually didn't do that at all. And so as they expanded, they changed services and their name was confusing and was causing problems. And so those are just some of the times when you might need a brand transformation. But I also think there are a lot of other problems that people think are like specific problems that are really related to the brand. For example, you might put out a job post and you aren't getting very many responses. And so the first thing people think is, ooh, we need to think about the compensation and give the person more money. But it's often the case, it's often not more money. It's often that there's a negative brand perception in the market. And so what you think might be a recruiting problem is actually a brand problem. And so there are things like that that indicate that it might be time for a transformation. Maybe you're
Yeah.
experiencing pricing pressure. People are saying like, oh, this is too much. Maybe they think it's too much because they don't understand your true value and they perceive you as an undifferentiated offering. And if you're undifferentiated, you're going to be it's going to be assumed that you're a low price
Yeah.
offering. So there are some of
Yeah.
those
Thank
other business problems you might have that are hidden that are really
Yeah.
good reasons to think about a transformation.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is rapid growth, transfer of leadership. If you are expanding to a new service line, yeah, a whole lot of them, and this is really amazing to actually more like consider brand transformation. So, for a founder listening today, what is the first branding decisions they should rethink?
As a founder, it's tempting to just pick a name and then move on. So the first thing I would do is thinking about planning for success. I think a lot of people have in the back of their head that this might not work, so I'm just going to like do something quick and move on with it. And so the first thing I would think about is what's a name that can scale with you. And I actually wrote a book called The Naming Book, and it's aimed exactly at that person. It's aimed at the person who wants to learn. They want to name one thing and then forget about naming and move on and do whatever their business was. I didn't write this for naming experts. If I didn't write it for brand agencies, it's really for entrepreneurs, and it leads you kind of step by step how to create a name. And so that's really the first big decision is, what are you going to call it, and plan for success. And there are just issues with success that I brought up related to trademarks. And then now important is what URLs are available. Can you get social handles that match the URLs? Things like that that'll just make your life easy if you think of them at the beginning. And it seems like it wastes time, but the problem is later on it's really expensive to undo, and it takes a lot of time and money to undo them later. So that would be my first advice to any entrepreneur. Begin
Yeah,
with the name. Get a name that works, that you not, and it's not just a name that you like. You have to think of what's the real criteria, and the real criteria is that you want to create a piece of intellectual property, right? And so it's got to be available to be a
yeah,
trademark.
yeah. Yeah, thank you so much, Brad. It's really amazing. So for my audience who actually want to connect with you, reach out to you, and even get your book, where is the best platform to reach out, and how can they reach out to you?
They can reach out and learn more about my business at bullhorncreative.com, and we're Bullhorn Creative, I think, just about everywhere, social media as well. And if they want to learn more about the book, I have a website, thenamingbook.com, or it's also available kind of anywhere you would buy books, if you buy them on Amazon or whatever. So yeah, The Naming Book and Bullhorn Creative. That's how to find me.
Yeah, amazing, amazing. Yeah, Brad, thank you so much. It's really amazing having you on this particular show. Your story reminds us that branding is not decoration, it's direction. Or when business
Yes,
gets clear on who they are and who they speak, growth follow with purpose. Yeah, thank you for actually more like being a guest in the Making of Me
absolutely.
podcast. And thank you for this episode, Brad.
Of course. Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you.